Depression and suicide aren't new in Africa. While some say this in harsh tones, quite a number of people believe that those who go through this dilemma have been taken over by some being not seen by the ordinary eye. As experts try to unravel the main cause of this, then the lockdown came. A lot of people staying back at home actually aggravated an already bad situation. On VSA Today, we'll be looking at the main reason people are depressed and are very young and even old have decided that the only way out of it is to take one's own life. I'm Sulaiman, welcome. There's hardly one person on the continent who doesn't know someone directly or indirectly who's gone through the dilemma of depression or suicide. Until now, depression has never been considered a critical issue in Africa. Times have changed and many cases of suicide are reported. Now, castigations, exclusion, stigmatization, and many other treatments are what people mete out on patients of depression. As it eats deeply into Africans and many suffer silently, the continent didn't realize a problem was on its hand early enough. Social media soon told the story better as suicide notes became the alert as to the enormity of the problem at hand. In Africa, at least 34,000 suicide cases are reported every year, and like the rest of the world, it is a problem. It cuts across, regardless of color, place, class, or position. Depression and poor state of mental health has become a leading cause of death on the continent. Joining me on VSA Today are two African mental experts, Dr. Sulaiman Teferra, who is the Chair, Department of Psychiatry, Addis Ababa University in Ethiopia, and Ladipo Aduralere, a psychologist from Nigeria. Ladies and gentlemen, many thanks for being with us on this program.
It's my pleasure.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's go to Addis Ababa to start this. Doctor, depression is a serious mental illness. A good thing we're looking at it today. It affects millions of people around the world. However, it is still unclear what causes depression. Could you please tell us from your clinical experience what you think are the major causes of depression and even the possible risk factors?
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me again. As you know, depression is a very common mental disorder all over the world. If I take you back in time, in the old days, there was a belief that it does not occur in Africa. But, we have plenty of evidence now that millions of Africans are suffering from depression. And the causes of depression are divided into three. We call it the biopsychosocial explanation. The first cause is biological. Some people can have, chemical imbalance in the brain, which leads to depression. Some people may abuse, alcohol and drugs, which again leads to depression. Some disease conditions affecting the brain, and some medications like antiretroviral medications, steroids, can lead to depression. So these are some of the causes of the biological causes of depression, while the predominant explanatory model nowadays is more of psychosocial. So we have a lot of stressors that affect the mind of individuals. For instance, economic hardships, conflicts, stress at work, in marriage, different forms of abuses, physical, sexual abuse, and the current stress, the pandemic, for instance, COVID-19 can predispose many people to depression. So we divide the causes of depression, as I said earlier, into biological and psychosocial. So in Africa, we say predominantly psychosocial reasons contribute to depression, particularly poverty, conflict, and violence.
No, I think critically, I think if you just unpacked it for us now, it looks like there is a nexus between, development, in Africa and what we're dealing with at the moment. Let me bring in Dr. Aduralere. Dr. Sulaiman has, given a wide range of reasons, and perhaps there are signs there for us to notice if anyone is going going through depression.
All right, thank you. Yes, so when people get down with depression, or they have them, or you diagnose them with depression, there are certain signs that they would see, and also others might see, and you can call them the affect signs. You can see people come down with low mood, and they tend to want to spend time alone. Then they have loss of interest in things that they usually have pleasure in. They are, thinking, like they have, it's called evolution, like they have little or no feelings for anything. And also there's going to be there's usually a deterioration in their daily living life, like things like having your bath, sleeping, eating, there's a, noticeable deterioration in that. And also we have people, come down with symptoms like, thoughts of suicide, their conversations, they ask things about suicide, and they, if you ask them if they have, thought about taking their own life, you would hear positive responses, or some might have not even attempted it, but in their conversations there is death and things related. You would notice weight loss, you would notice, like I said, poor appetite and sleep. These are just to mention a few that are common amongst individuals that are living with depression or might come down with depression.
Let me just sorry to butt in there. We'll come back looking at pretty much talk more of the signs. Let me go back to Addis Ababa, to Dr. Sulaiman. Some of the things you highlighted, Dr. Sulaiman, you did say the psychosocial is the main issue Africa is dealing with, and not the biological. Could you expatiate more on that so that we know what we mean by the psychosocial aspect of depression that ultimately leads to suicide for some?
Thank you very much. It's just the predominance. Otherwise, the biological causes are still common in Africa as well. As I said earlier, the abuse of alcohol and drugs is common in Africa, which can contribute to depression. But when I say psychosocial reasons, in Africa, as you know, we have so many challenges. Our number one challenge is poverty. So poverty and deprivation can lead to chronic emotional stress, which leads to depression. So we have plenty of evidence from Africa showing the relationship between poverty and depression. So it has been really studied extensively, and we have demonstrated the relationship between poverty and depression. So it's very important in Africa as a factor, while it may not be relevant in the developed world. The other psychosocial causes include violence. So in Africa, as you know, we are exposed to chronic violence, be it domestic violence or communal violence, for that matter. In many countries, there is violence, at a communal level, where there is a civil war and internal conflict. While at the household level also, we have the highest level of domestic violence, where women are exposed to extreme violence at home. So we know depression affects women twice compared with men. So these psychosocial factors, poverty, violence, and deprivation will contribute to the high prevalence of depression that we see in women.
So let me come quickly here to Dr. Ladipo. The thing here that Dr. Sulaiman has painted, he said that there are key things that Africa is dealing with at the moment, the biological and the psychosocial. In your country, Nigeria, we've seen quite a number of people who have ultimately committed suicide. Now, how can we differentiate merely being depressed or extremely sad from major depression?
Okay, thank you. So, I'm going to try to explain this with a scenario to make it much more clearer. So sadness now, for example, when we're sad about something, we're sad about an event, situation, or something that someone has done to us, So when that situation or issue has been resolved, your mind is able to go back to its former state of peace, and you're able to function as you used to. But with clinical depression, irrespective of the challenge or irrespective of the situation, despite the fact that it has been resolved, the individual is unable to go back to the former state of mind or peace. There is still that, thought. There's still that lethargic feeling. There is still that low mood. There is still the, symptoms that I explained to you, that the person might feel, loss of interest in things that they usually find pleasurable before. So clinical depression also, these symptoms that, were earlier stated has been going on consistently for a very long period of time, like 2 weeks and more. The person, interacting with friends, always wanting to be alone despite the fact that he's in amongst people. But, you still find the person having these same symptoms running over repeatedly for a long period of time, 2 weeks. Once you run a diagnosis and you see that, okay, this thing has been happening, is it mild, is it moderate or severe? Those are things that would determine, but like I said, 2 weeks and more is safe for you to say that someone is clinically depressed. Consistently. You don't come out of it like, okay, we just jump consistently for 2 weeks. Okay, consistently.
I go to Addis Ababa. Dr. Sulaiman, you said that for women, they tend to have such tendency twice in a life cycle than men. Perhaps you want to, stretch this for us so that we can better understand what you mean by that, and if there are causes that are responsible for women going through that more than once.
Yes, thank you very much. I think this is a very important question because of its public health significance. Understanding the risk factors for depression will result in, effective preventive interventions. So epidemiologic studies have shown that the prevalence of depression in women is double that of men. For various reasons. There have been several explanations. One of them is biological. Certain, hormones are implicated in predisposing women to depression. But this is really a small part of the explanation. The predominant reason for depression in women is psychosocial. As you know, as the saying goes, this is a man's world. So women are subjected to lots of stresses throughout their life. As I said earlier, violence or gender-based violence is very common, even in highly developed countries. So chronic gender-based violence can predispose women to depression. The other one is economic and social deprivation. Again, women are economically disadvantaged and in some cases, live in extreme poverty, which will predispose them to depression. They also carry, a big burden of looking after the family. Even if a man is present in the house, still, a big part of the responsibility for caring for the family will rest on the women. So they are really subjected to chronic stress, which will lead to depression. So psychosocial factors contribute enormously to the risk of depression in women, although certain hormonal differences explain a portion of the depression that we see in women.
Before I come back to Dr. Ladipo, I want to continue with you on this. Dr. Sulaiman, there's something you said in your opening, and once upon a time in Africa, a lot of people thought an African can't be depressed. An African can never have suicidal, ideation or tendency. At what point did we start believing that truly this is something that we must address?
Of course, this view was predominant in the colonial times. And in general, Africans were considered to be less sophisticated, and they do not dwell on the mind. They just, do some basic, manual work. And it was believed that Africans were literally experiencing, little emotion, and they were not really dwelling on the mind. So that belief led to the idea that depression doesn't exist among Africans. But evidence started to come out, after independence. African scientists started to investigate psychological disorders in the continent, and started showing the evidence that Africans can also suffer from depression. And this was in the past 30, 40 years, where, evidence started to accumulate. And now some studies, we have several studies in many countries. For instance, in my country, there was a national survey which showed about 9% prevalence of depression, which is fairly comparable to depression in Europe or North America. Of course, these are community surveys, so they do not necessarily represent clinical depression that was explained before. In surveys, we ask members of the population for experiencing, any of these depressive symptoms, and there is a scoring mechanism where, the presence or absence of depression is measured, but it has to be confirmed by a clinician to call it clinical depression. So the depression that is reported in surveys may not necessarily equal to clinical depression.
Let me jump in here, and in fact, that is the main reason we must also be very careful so that we speak with to experts. Ladipo, I'm bringing you back in here, listening to Dr. Sulaiman. What comes to mind? Top of mind, I'm thinking of the young African who is really, really into social media and social influence and lifestyles. Tell us, for some of those that you've been trying to manage, have you come across anyone, any young African, any young Nigerian that is getting into the twin problem of depression or suicide as a result of, peer pressure or social media, involvement?
So, with clients that I have taken on, I've seen situations and cases whereby people have been able to adapt behaviors because of social media use, behaviors that they necessarily did not have before. So due to consistent use of the internet and being on social media, they have taken on behaviors and attitudes that were not present in them before. And with that, we have people come down with behaviors that affects their daily life, affects their relationship with other people. So they want to spend much more time on social media rather than interact with people. And when social media is not gratifying them like it used to, it becomes a problem. And also there are cases, stories, and interactions from others that starts to affect how they view life, how they see things, and how they also perceive themselves. So this in itself, if and when the person has been diagnosed with depression, then it becomes a contributing factor. Like Dr. Sulaiman has rightly said, there are biological factors that can lead to mental illnesses. And if the person is susceptible to depression due to biological factors and is exposed to social media's negative communications and conversation, the person can, it can trigger the onset of depression for the individual. And also we have cases where communications and, the interesting thing is social media is filled with people with real life experiences, unique things happening in their own lives, but they are pulling out and dishing out their informations on the media. And unconsciously we do not sift the informations we are taking in. So clients that have seen cases of suicide and they have actually had thoughts of taking their own life, or they've even attempted it and they've seen someone successfully go through with the act, the use of social media can inform that. And clients that I have had that have had situations of attempted suicide and was informed by social media is because they have seen cases of people that have successfully gone through with the act and they decided to try it out. So yes, social media has contributed to that for some clients that I have seen.
We'll take a moment. When we come back, Dr. Sulaiman and of course Ladipo, we'll be looking at pretty much more how we can bring about the desired help, but first trying to understand what goes on in the mind of anyone who is going through depression and suicidal ideation. That's when we return. On Village Square Africa today here on News Central, we're trying to defog the twin problem of depression and suicide on the continent. In South Africa, at least 1 in 10 teen deaths is caused by suicide, and one of the triggers of this has been found to be examination disappointment. In Africa, Lesotho has the highest suicide rate at 29%, 29 per 100,000 people. Most sub-Saharan countries suffer from a paucity of mental health professionals, with probably only one psychiatrist per a million population, which is very sad. This has honestly affected care for people who suffer from mental health challenges. Now, only 15% of South Africans with mental health challenges receive treatment. It is about the same rate in Nigeria, in Ghana, and even in Ethiopia, where we have Dr. Sulaiman Teferra. Now, it is lower than 10% in Ethiopia. Now, on the continent, government expenditure per capita on mental health is $0.1. Now, these are extremely low numbers when one compares them with what's obtainable in the more developed parts of the world. And, well, those are some of the key issues we're looking at today. Let's go back to Addis Ababa, where Dr. Sulaiman Teferra, who is the chair Department of Psychiatry, Addis Ababa University, and of course in Lagos, Nigeria, Ladipo Aduralere, a psychologist, is with us. But I'm taking this to Addis Ababa, to you, Dr. Sulaiman. You know, there's still a lot to do on the part of government in terms of alertness to the mental health of their citizens. Now, the gaps in financial commitments are still very wide. You have also stated that, poverty is another trigger. So do the respective ministries of health on the continent look down on this very all-important aspect of bringing the citizens better mental health?
Well, I have been in the field of mental health for the past 15 years. And it has always been a challenge to get the attention of governments. I have worked as a technical working group member at the Federal Ministry of Health, advising the responsible department on how to improve mental health services for the citizens. But unfortunately, the amount of money allocated for mental health is very, very low. In fact, recently we noticed some improvement, but it was 0.9% of the total health budget. So that's how much mental health gets at best, at least in Ethiopia. It's much less in many African countries. I know that. I'm a member of the African Association of Psychiatrists. I have traveled to many African countries, including West Africa, Nigeria, Ghana, Southern African countries, Malawi, Zimbabwe, South Africa, and of course the Eastern Africa region. So I'm familiar with many of the mental health services in sub-Saharan Africa. We have a population of over 1 billion in sub-Saharan Africa, but the number of psychiatrists is surprisingly low. It's about 1,000 psychiatrists for the whole of 1 billion people in sub-Saharan Africa. There are many countries in Africa.
So would you say, Dr. Sulaiman, sorry to cut you there, would you say Africa is unaware of this all-important aspect of its development, because this is key, that mental health is the key to developing the continent?
Yes, I mean, mental health, you need to have a healthy mind to be productive. That's just very basic knowledge, because productivity and development rests on performance of individuals, and those individuals need to be healthy and productive. And research shows 1 in 5 people, or 20% of adults, suffer from one form or another mental disorder, mild to moderate, severe. It depends, on how the person is evaluated. But 1 in 5 adults suffer from mental disorders during their lifetime. So millions of adults are affected. But in our study, at least in Ethiopia, which I believe is similar in the rest of the African countries, is access to mental health services, modern mental health services, is around 5 to 10%. So more than 90% of patients who need mental health service do not have access to modern mental health care.
Allow me bring in Ladipo here, because Ladipo, gone are the days when the community was the base point of social interactions, and of course pretty much a lot of things happen around the community. Now, listening to Dr. Sulaiman, would you say are the African communal life that was holding communities together has actually been lost in the quest for developing such societies?
Well, with mental health in communities and even on social media, all it takes is awareness. So African culture or the communal living in societies has not necessarily been lost. It is just a shift and change in how people perceive things and how they receive information. So in order to adequately pass information to people, even in communities, we still need to follow the change that is happening in such communities. So change is a function of the trend happening at a particular point in time. So as mental health practitioners that want the necessary information about mental illness to get to the community, we need to use the resources available in such communities to get across the information, be it because now we can safely call social media a community. Social media a community, and also our traditional community still stands as a community, because in Africa we still have communities that do not have access to large influx of information that social media provides. So how do we reach those people with our awareness of mental health issues and our awareness of eradicating stigma or talking about suicide and other type of mental illness? We still need to use the resources that such communities have to get information across to them. And for social media, also making use of the available resources, the vast amount of resources, to get across the right information about mental health to the people that are using such platforms.
So, Dr. Sulaiman, some of the things we have seen here on the continent, some key issues here are communities and religion. Sometimes, people are caught between whether to approach experts like yourself or first to approach religious leaders, because they still think that some people who go through some mental challenges or problems are people that some form of evil spirits somewhere must have taken over their mind. Are you aware of such arguments?
Yes, it's an everyday experience in a way. Of course, communities in Africa predominantly believe in what we call the religious magical explanation. So it's not only religion, but some, magical explanations also are predominant in Africa. It used to be the same, in Europe and North America, or, in the civilized world about 100 years ago. With the advent of, modern knowledge and science, neuroscience, more advanced, civilized or developed countries have shifted their belief into the neuroscience or the biological explanations, or what we call the disease model. But in Africa, we hold, the traditional cultural, spiritual, religious explanation. And there is nothing wrong with holding that view. The only challenge we experience in our everyday clinical work is people usually abandon the modern care in preference for what we call the alternative care. Alternative care system is, the spiritual, religious, traditional healers, herbalists, which are prevalent, in Africa. So we have been discussing about, developing collaboration with these alternative care providers so that, patients get a holistic treatment, because you cannot disregard, the belief system of an individual while delivering modern care services. We cannot, dismiss that belief system as irrelevant and backward. It has value in the healing of the individual. So that has to be respected, but we need to form, alliance with the alternative care service providers so that integrated services can be given to our patients. But it's really, an important perspective that should be taken into account.
Do you think the continent, and this will go to both of you before we go on a very short break, do you think the continent is doing enough to reporting suicide cases? Ladipo, you go first.
Okay, all right, thank you. So, reporting suicide case has to do with every individual. Aside from how mainstream media, talks about suicide, in Nigeria currently, suicide is still a crime. So it has, like, there are channels that will portray it as, a crime. And, it also depends on how the individual listening or receiving such information perceives it. That's why I said suicide reported is individual based, because I go on social media, I put out information based on the knowledge I have about it. Other people come on social media and put out information about suicide based on the knowledge they have. They make comments, they put out posts and things regarding suicide, all based on the knowledge that they have. So if we can have the adequate knowledge, sufficient knowledge that can cover suicide with the right facts, it would be very wise for individuals to look at those materials, because they are available on the internet, and talk about it from such facts rather than talk about suicide from assumptions. Because we cannot leave the reportage of suicide to just mainstream medias. We pick information from mainstream media and add our own cultural beliefs, religious beliefs, and personal experiences in how we are going to shape the information that other people would come and react to, or even receive and use it in either attempting or, taking their own life, or even just feeding the community with such beliefs. So, like I said, it is individual based. The reportage of suicide is individual based.
So, Dr. Sulaiman, is the continent doing enough for reporting suicide cases?
It's really one area where we have a huge gap. Anecdotal evidence shows suicide is common, in many countries in Africa. But for instance, if you look at the data in the US, it's in the top 10, causes of death in the US. But in Africa, it's nowhere to be seen because governments are not paying attention to collecting concrete data from the community. That's the number one problem. On the other hand, suicide is a taboo subject in Africa. There are several studies on suicide from the continent who show that communities consider suicide offense against the deity, the higher power, God, Allah, or whoever you believe in. So it's against faith and religion. So it's a taboo subject. Even in the household, when someone commits suicide, they usually hide. They just give other reasons for that person's death. And usually they don't report it to the government, to hospitals and so on. So people are usually buried, without being registered as suicide cases. For instance, in my country, the national prevalence of suicide is about 8 suicide per 100,000, probably one of the lowest in the world. But do we trust this figure? I don't think it's really a reality. While you said other African countries have 2-3 times higher rates of suicide, why do we have the lowest rates of suicide in Ethiopia? People try to explain it, using religion and so on, because this country is, it's an ancient country which has highly religious society and so on. It may have some protective factor because suicide is really against, every kind of religion. But underreporting is a huge problem. There should be a system of reporting and recording suicide cases as they happen. For instance, we have a system of registering maternal death when a mother dies giving birth. It is registered in every village that happens. So we have nearly accurate number of mothers who die giving birth. But when it comes to suicide, we don't know how many people commit suicide every year because it's not reported and there is no system set by the government to register these cases. So there is a huge gap because, demonstrating suicide will have a significant role in advocating for mental health. Because, governments are interested in mortality, they are interested in death. When you tell them that this thing kills, they wake up.
Anyway, my producer has said that, well, we shouldn't bother about the break, so we just coast home. Listening to both of you, Dr. Sulaiman and Ladipo, what comes to mind is what we have been able to highlight here on the continent, one of which is poverty, unemployment, economic hardship across the continent. They are all considered strong causes of depression and suicide in Africa. Now, many people who suffer from depression don't get good medical access, with that figure placed at 80%, for instance, in Nigeria. Social media, as Ladipo did say, well, especially social media companies and the justice system cannot be left out in this issue. If you look at it critically, as they play key roles in limiting some of the causes of depression. Now let's talk about the statistics now, which you have also highlighted. The statistics say there are 34,000 cases of suicide in Africa per year, and in recent time it has increased. For Dr. Sulaiman, you've asked a very fantastic question: how we show that this is the actual true representation of this number. So let me go to you, Dr. Ladipo. What are the possible therapeutic interventions for people struggling with depression?
Okay, so with depression, to clinically diagnose a person with depression, there are intakes, examination, and tests that would be required before you can make a proper diagnosis. And after a proper diagnosis has been made, depending on the severity of the case presented, the therapist, in conjunction with other mental health practitioners handling the case, like psychiatrists, the occupational therapist, if need be, would determine how to go about the course of treatment. So, like I said, the severity of the case would determine the course of treatment. And Dr. Solomon has mentioned that it goes from mild to severe. So, with cases that are mild, psychotherapy is good to help the individual manage the situation and come to terms. In psychology, we have cognitive behavioral therapy, where we try to help the individual, guide the individual to see, a very, robust way of looking at situations in the positive light, rather than concentrate on the negative aspects of things and allow the mind to feed on such information. Then, if it's mild or severe, depending on how the individual has, maximized such information that has led to the depression, and how and if there are, comorbid situations, or if, it is biologically inclined, psychiatrists would prescribe medications to help with the brain, with the chemical imbalance that might be present in the individual's brain. So if there is a chemical imbalance, the medication would manage the situation by, toning down, or, trying to maintain the expected level of how the chemical is supposed to operate. So with the aid of psychotherapy to manage the behavioral aspect for the individual. And
let me bring in Dr. Sulaiman. Sorry, Ladipo, I'm trying to take a whole lot to take a lot here before we wrap up. Dr. Sulaiman, as comical as it may sound, do you think it's high time African countries set up a ministry of happiness? Because in Africa, there's an average of 15 suicide deaths per 100,000 people.
Ministry of Happiness.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much. Depression doesn't mean not being happy. People can still lead, a normal life, which is fulfilling, meaningful. When someone is depressed, what happens is the person loses meaning in life. So it's not the absence of happiness. So I don't think we need a ministry of happiness. We need a ministry of wellness. We need wellness, not happiness, because wellness leads to happiness.
I think it's a fine place. That's where I was actually looking out for. It's a fine place for us to wrap this. But you agree that victims of war across Africa and the trauma of the past is still found in the present. That's what I got listening to both of you. So tomorrow, we'll discuss the victims and players of war and how they deal with depression and post-traumatic stress disorder. So Dr. Sulaiman Teferra, who's Chair, Department of Psychiatry, Addis Ababa University in Ethiopia, and Ladipo Aduralere, a psychologist from here, Lagos in Nigeria. Many thanks for being such a nice company, for helping the continent stay well. I think I got that right, Dr. Sulaiman. It's about wellness.
Thank you very much.
All right, again, many thanks for watching.
Wellness.
Yes, and don't forget to watch us live on youtube.com/News Central TV and on Star Times, Channel 274. You can also check the latest updates on Africa on newscentral.africa. And of course, I'll return tomorrow. See you then.
Bye-bye.